Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Daily Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation, and I should probably run this ad like I'm obligated to do. Here we go. You're going to hear from the SAF just a second.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have vowed to take away your Second Amendment rights through gun bans, gun confiscation, and government regulations. Now, Joe Biden is no longer hiding his real intentions, and we need you to take action now.
Whether it's a 9mm pistol or whether it's a rifle, is ridiculous. I'm continuing to push to eliminate the sale of those things. But
the Biden administration is coming after your right to own any gun, and we need you to text PROTECT2A to 888-762-0221. Joe Biden has already issued executive orders. He is now demanding Congress push through radical gun legislation. You can fight back to stop Joe Biden's gun grab, but you must text PROTECT2A to 888-762-0221. Take action to protect your right to keep and bear arms. We urgently need millions of Americans to text PROTECT2A to 888-762-0221. Text PROTECT2A to 888-762-0221.
All right, let me go ahead and bring Dan in. Everybody should be familiar with Dan Waz. Of course, he's author of the Good Gun, Bad Guys series of books and on the Loaded Mike show. Now, you do that once a week, and that actually, you just got back from doing that, right, Dan?
Yeah, actually, it's a 1 week. Every week we do the show. The new episode airs on Fridays. It's called the Loaded Mic, loadedmic.com, and that's MIC like microphone.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the most important Second Amendment issues, and so it's heavily we're heavily weighted in Second Amendment conversations and content. However, we do get into topics of the day, and Biden comes up a lot, and this, so we try to keep people up to date on some of the topics. Great show. We have a blast. It's me as the host, the host rather. My co-host is John Chiara, and we bring guests on, and we have my son Danny Wass Jr. produces the show. And it's just a blast. We have a lot of fun. We goof around. It's fun, but we have a good message as well. And so loadedmic.com if people want to check that out.
Very cool. We're already we just went live literally a minute ago, and we're already getting comments coming in. Specifically, let me get this up there. Diane says, "Love your Loaded Mic show, Dan." So.
Thank you, Diane. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So, let's get we've got some stuff to talk about today, and NSSF. We just got done with SHOT Show here a little while ago. NSSF put out a report, and let me go ahead and pull that back up. But looks like 5.4 million new gun owners last year. And in a different news story, I seen reporting that some 60% of those new gun owners were seeking training, which I think is even better news than we've got 5.4 million new gun owners, which is great news in and of itself. The fact that the majority of those new gun owners are seeking training, man, that's stupendous right there.
Yeah. Well, what we find is that when people become first-time gun owners, that's the first thing they do. So the idea that the anti-gun media tries to portray is that they need government-regulated, courses and instruction and all this stuff. No, the truth is, gun owners want to be trained. They want to understand how to use their firearms safely, and so that's not even an issue. The problem is, the anti-gun crowd and the anti-gun media has been making it such a taboo topic that they're trying to prevent, firearms training and things like that because they don't want people to become gun owners. This is why we don't have firearms training in schools anymore, for instance. Now, there was a time when we had firearms training in schools, just like kind of like a driver's ed course. But they took that out, and what that does is it actually decreases the availability for people to become acquainted with guns, and it's their intent is to reduce the number of gun owners as we move into the future and as we continue through generations. Mm-hmm. However, it doesn't seem to be working, because they're also perpetuating a certain level of violence in our society, like stand-in, placeholder Governor Hochul in New York, by letting prisoners out of jail, and all the left-wing mayors and governors who encouraged the riots of 2020 by Antifa and BLM. So what happens is they create this violence, and more people want to start becoming a gun owner to be able to protect themselves and their family. This is why we have the 5.4 million new gun owners.
And I'm gonna go off a little bit into left field here. Maybe not even stay inside the ballpark. I may be off in the football stadium instead of the baseball park here, but the restriction of knowledge is never a good thing. I remember I'm of the age where sex education was very, very, very controversial when I was a young person. And it was the parents were always, don't send the kids through sex ed. They'll become just sex fiends and it'll ruin the kids. Well, I'm telling you what, when I went through sex ed as a 13-year-old, it scared the living crap out of me and probably made me abstain for a lot longer than I normally would have, because I was just terrified when I went through sex ed. I don't think knowledge is a bad thing for anybody, including in the firearms arena. If you instill knowledge and you instill respect, it can do nothing but generate benefits.
No, that's absolutely true, and that's why they want to take away those outlets, those avenues for people to learn about firearms and whatever, because they want to shut off that interest. They don't want kids to be interested, and this is a lot of reasons why they want to tax ammo and limit the usage of guns, because the more they can limit the usage of guns and the more they can demonize guns in our society, their idea is that through generations, kids will grow up as non-gun owning families, and they will have less of an interest. But it's, like I said, it's really interesting what's happening right now, because the fear of being the victim of a violent attack. And let me add this: in this country, and people listen to this and you can do the math on it if you'd like, there are just about 330 million people in America, and there's over 1 million violent acts, and a recent DOJ study showed over 5 million violent acts per year in America. If you do the math on that, over 5 million violent acts per year in America with only 330 million people, if you do the math on that, you have about a 1 in 74 or 75 chance of being the victim of a violent attack. That means out of 75 people, one of you is going to be the victim of a violent attack. I don't like those odds one bit. So, and I think people are starting to realize. And that's
every year. So if you're going to live beyond the age of 75, guess what? Law of averages, in your life, you're going to be a victim.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the ironic thing is the same people who are saying, oh, well, that'll never happen to me, are the same people who are buying lottery tickets with a 1 in 20 million chance of winning, So, but they'll do everything they can to shape the narrative of bad for guns. But gun ownership, the truth is, guns are good. Guns are a net positive because they're used over 2.5 million times per year in America in defensive ways to protect life. And they're used a relatively small amount to do harm. So the vast majority of gun usage is for self-defense, and it works. But the truth is, they don't want to tell you that. They don't want you to understand that. But it's a net positive. Gun ownership is a good thing, And I forget where we started off on that, Paul, but I know I went off on a tangent, but there
And
you
then
go.
I went off on a tangent of your tangent. So, yeah. Get a couple comments in here. Riding shotgun with Charlie. Charlie's just checking in, but I love his check in. Whoops. He says, good evening. I can't say good evening, Patriots. John Petrolino thinks I hijacked it from him. Well, you know what, Charlie? Dan's a Patriot. I consider myself a Patriot, so you can say good evening, Patriots, I think.
Hey, Charlie, how are you, pal? Charlie, if people know, I'm sure most of the people watching the show know who Charlie is. Charlie's got a great riding shotgun with Charlie that he does, and Charlie recently came up to New York to our studio and did an episode of the Loaded Mic with us. So if people want to check out the Charlie Cook episode of Loaded Mic, that was a fun time. Thanks, Charlie.
Then Diane also says, people are getting tired of crime in their cities, and this is why there are so many new gun owners. You know, even in my home city of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Susan and I comment, we follow the news very closely because I have to follow the news closely for my job. And Susan and I talk about it a lot, just as, part of our daily conversation at the house. And we comment all the time because we follow the news closely that we don't remember so many shootings, so many violent crimes, even in our area. And so we, on an almost daily basis, I'm telling her, I'm really glad you're armed when you go to work. And she says, I'm really glad you're armed when you stay home alone during the day. So, yeah, it's you're absolutely right, Diane. It's the crime, it could be a facet of we're so much more connected to the news and we find out about crime more. That could be part of it, but the knowledge of crime, certainly with Susan and I, makes us so much more grateful that we're armed and so much more convinced in the correctness of our decision to be armed 24/7. That. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, thanks for the comment, Diane. After the 2020 riots, and this changed a lot when it comes to as far as new gun owners, but we had all the left-wing riots in 2020, the Summer of Love, that, what was her name? Was she a Seattle mayor? I think she was Seattle mayor.
Yeah, I can't remember her name, but I know who you're speaking of.
Summer of Love. I wish I could think of her name. She was, oh my God, what a train wreck she was. But anyway, so she called it the Summer of Love, but what it was riots and mayhem and violence and burning and looting and all sorts of stuff. So what happened during that time is gun sales skyrocketed, and there were lines. I remember reading articles about California gun shops with lines around the block of people just waiting to get into the shop, and guns were selling like crazy. So we had this huge uptick in gun purchases, and it was measured by the NICS background check, the number of background checks that were done. And these were the vast, I think it was almost half of the new gun purchases in 2020 were first timers. In other words, people who never owned a gun before. So what does this tell you? It's exactly what Diane is saying. People who were not necessarily gun owners decided that their life and their families' lives are more important than some political positioning, and they started becoming gun owners. And that's just the reality of it. So when the Democrats create violence and let prisoners out of jail and let these rioters go run crazy and take over cities, when they do that and they create that kind of violence, what they're really doing is they're encouraging gun sales, because they're encouraging people to take their life protection into their own hands.
Absolutely. Well, and let's face it, ultimately you are your own first responder. no matter where you live, you are the first person there. You are ultimately the only one that gets to make the decision whether you're going to make it through this or not. So I would encourage you to have the best tools available at your disposal to make sure you do. I want to get this comment in too. George Geller says the odds depend on what neighborhood you live in. I grew up in the crappy area of a big city, so the odds were pretty good or bad, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me address that. George, that's a great point. And when I use the numbers, 1 in 74 chance, a lot of times what I get is people will say, well, wait a minute, my odds might be worse living in a certain part of town, whereas if you live in a better part of town or even a gated community, your odds are much different. Mm-hmm. So that's true. But the overall odds don't change. What happens is that some people living in more dangerous areas, their odds do get worse because the number of people in America didn't change and the number of violent attacks didn't change. So if you live in a nice upscale suburb and your violence level is low, yeah, your odds are going to be much better, but somebody else's odds just got much worse.
And there's another thing you can do to change your odds as well, and that is getting training. And I'm beyond firearms, but getting training in things like situational awareness, getting training and keeping yourself out of those situations. And there is training for that. It's usually done by firearms trainers, but you can keep yourself out of danger without getting the firearm out. Matter of fact, I hope every day that when I strap a gun on that I never, ever, ever, ever have to use it. I don't put a gun on going, good, is this going to be the day I finally get to use it? It's, let's pray this is another day I never, ever have to use it. But the training, and by the way, I've had a lot of training. The training I've had, most of it from the very beginning, starts with how to keep out of situations where you may have to use it. One of my favorite quotes what I've ever gotten when I went through training is, I've never lost a gunfight I wasn't in. Stay the hell out of trouble and everything's going to be great.
Yeah, good point. And you're right. Every time you put that gun in your belt, when you leave the house or whatever, it's sort of a humbling feeling, because you know that with that comes a huge responsibility. They say with great power comes responsibility, but when you carry a gun, there's a certain level of responsibility that you now have that you didn't have before. And there's a certain ability, capability that you have that you didn't have before. And it's just important to recognize that. I don't think there are many gun owners who carry a gun recklessly. I mean, all the people that I know carry very responsibly. Mm-hmm. And I think just that just kind of goes along with it, is that level of responsibility.
Yeah. And you and I, this past October, we were at AmCon together, and we've been to things like Gun Rights Policy Conference. I recall last time Gun Rights Policy Conference was in person was in Phoenix, and we were in amongst 700-800 people. There were 1,100 people at that particular Gun Rights Policy Conference that were registered. And I suppose there were 900 at one time in one room. And I would guess that the vast majority of those were armed. And you know what? Walking in that room, I felt the safest of any room I've ever been in. Simply because I knew the odds of anybody acting irresponsibly were incredibly, amazingly low. And there were enough people around that should one person act irresponsibly, there were enough people around to temper the use of to temper the effect of the one irresponsible person.
But you know what the funny thing is that in those situations that that sort of irresponsible behavior you're talking about, it never happens. It never happens among gun owners. When it does happen, are in gun-free zone, when there's no one armed and bad elements come from the outside. That's always the case. It's never the case when you have like an NRA or a Second Amendment or GOA seminar or conference or whatever. Mm-hmm. Those things never happen. And I go to a lot of these state events, like state gun rights groups, and I'll speak at state events, and the room is full of gun owners, and you don't even everybody's armed. Everybody is so nice, peaceful, respectful. Gun owners are some of the most responsible and respectful people that I've ever met in my life.
Our next comment just dovetails exactly off what you were just saying. John says, wolves go where the sheep are. There's growing crime in the safe suburbs. So where there are, let's just say, the more liberal neighborhoods, where the chances of the homeowners being unarmed or high, that's where the crime is rising, because that's where the criminals know they have the better chance of an unarmed victim. And are you going when the NRA show comes to town, when the Second Amendment Foundation's gun rights policy conference is coming to town, do you think the criminals are going to go say, hey, I wonder if I can go rob somebody at the NRA show? Do you think that's a smart idea?
Well, that's why, that's why I always say, if you're anti-gun and you're working hard to destroy the Second Amendment and destroy the rights of your fellow citizens, you should put a sign out in front of your house saying that this is a gun-free zone. At least let them know. At least be proud of your stance. Be proud of your anti-gun stance. But they won't do that because they're hypocrites, and they know that having a gun on you or in your house is the best way to protect yourself from violence. They know that, yet they don't want you to be able to do it. So the anti-gun crowd is the most hypocritical bunch that I've ever encountered.
Yeah, well, and I'm gonna stray just a touch away from guns here, but it goes straight into hypocrisy. One of the things that the other side does, and they're great for this, you'll get these millionaires saying, I don't pay enough taxes. Well, you know what, buddy? You can pay as much taxes as you want. If you don't think you're paying enough taxes, guess what? The federal government takes checks. Go ahead and send more.
Yeah. You know what that is? That's just virtue signaling. That's these people who want to appear as righteous and noble, but they don't actually believe. They won't actually take action on what they preach. It's these people are so transparent. And when I agree with you, Paul. When you see people like that, to me anyway, it shows right through. To tell you the truth, when they say things like that. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to say this to, and my brain. I just had a gear slip in my brain. I'm sorry. Founder of Microsoft, and the name slips my brain, and it never should. But when the founder of Microsoft says that, I'll believe you, buddy.
Bill Gates?
Yeah, Bill Gates, because he said that. You know what, Bill Gates? When you say that, if you provide me a receipt from the Department of Treasury where you paid an extra $300 million to them, then I'll believe you might actually mean it. But until I see that receipt for an extra $300, $400, $500 million, I think you're just blowing air out the backside. That's what I'm thinking. Wow, we're getting some great comments in here. Let me get a couple more of them in. George Geller, an armed society is a polite society. Robert Heinlein. There's a podcast out there, something about Polite Society podcast. I might have heard that somewhere. And
there's something out there. I wish I could remember what the rest of that quote was, because that's a great quote, and I'm trying to find it right now. But there's more to that quote. An armed society is a polite society. Here it is. People can see the full quote in Good Gun Bad Guy. Just thanks for asking, Paul, but there's a little promotion.
Okay. That was coming up in a few minutes, because believe it or not, we're almost to the end of our time, but go ahead.
An armed society is a polite society, and it continues on. So, and says, thanks for that quote, George, but it continues on and it says, manners are good when one may have to back up his acts with his life. So that's the full quote. Manners are good when one may have to back up his acts with his life. In other words, when you have to be able to defend yourself, protect yourself, and if when you're not polite, let's say, you have to back it up, and so that's why they say, arms and say, yeah, there it is. Manners are good.
He was almost as fast as you were. Yes.
Okay. Thanks, George. Great quote.
All right, and then Charlie Chambers has a comment here. Rob Morris wrote an article on how 20 million discrete carry permit holders are the most law-abiding group in the country, 4 times less likely to be arrested than any group, even less likely than law enforcement officers. Yeah. That's been out. That statistic has been out for quite a while. I remember that statistic when I very first started podcasting. I found that statistic. That comes from the book More Guns, Less Crime, and
John Lott.
Yeah, by John Lott, and that's as I have not found it updated, but I sincerely doubt that statistic has changed. I don't see us becoming more law breaking. I don't see law enforcement becoming a whole lot more law abiding. So I think that's still true. Let's see here.
That's a great point. Rob Morse is writing some great stuff, and thanks for that, Charlie. But yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
Well, we just got where we're down to. We're about 3 minutes from the bottom of the hour. I do want to get just to mention a few more stories. Georgia and Alabama both are running headlong towards permitless carry. Georgia, the bill advances in the Senate, and Alabama, I think it has just cleared its first hurdle. It's still in the House, and they've also got a Second Amendment Preservation Act that is moving forward in Alabama. On the state level, Dan, I think across the board in the state level, we're gaining freedoms left and right. More and more and more states are going towards permitless carry, or at least our gun rights are becoming better on a statewide level.
Well, I recently wrote an article about this, how constitutional carry is almost reaching a tipping point. We're almost at half the country in constitutional carry. And this should be pretty exciting for people, because I think Georgia and Alabama would be 23 and 24, or
they
22 and 23. Okay, 23 and 24,
yes.
Okay. That's pretty exciting. I mean, not too long ago we were somewhere in 18 and 19 range, and we've just recently had a whole bunch of states jump on. So that's awesome. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to see how do I put this? I would love to see national reciprocity make it through the federal system, and the 14th Amendment actually means something, meaning my South Dakota permit is good in every state, every territory, everywhere.
Yeah.
But what I would really like to see is just naturally every state become constitutional carry. Now, let's be honest about this. States like New York, New Jersey, Hawaii, California, Oregon, they're going to be a long way to get there, and it's a huge uphill fight. But we can dream.
Well, do I have a minute to comment on that?
Do it, yes.
Okay. Speaking of New York, my state, what's happening in New York is Governor Cuomo and Governor Hochul now have just been on a rampage to let as many prisoners out of jail. So they're creating a lot of violence in New York State. So what they're doing now is they're trying to blame it on guns. So they're creating a multi-state task force where they're going to search for illegal guns. Now, what I think this is going to lead to is more restrictions on guns gun transportation from other states. They're going to try to put more restrictions. Already, New York doesn't accept any other state's carry permit. But I think they're going to make more efforts to try and just completely eliminate guns, legal guns, from coming in. So they're working in the opposite direction, where some states are going constitutional carry, and you talk about state-to-state reciprocity. I think it would be fantastic. I just don't think, I think there's some states that will never want to get on board with state-to-state reciprocity. As a matter of fact, like New York, like I said, they're moving in the other direction to make it even harder.
Absolutely. Well, that's to be expected. And honestly, let me throw a little bit of a pitch in here for my boss. That is why, honestly, I believe if we get national reciprocity, it's going to come in the courts, not so much in the federal lawmaking system. I think it's going to come through the courts. And the way we get that is through people like my boss, Alan Gottlieb at the SAF, suing for it. Yeah. And it's easier to do that if we have more members. A lifetime membership at the SAF only costs $150. And that does a whole lot to be able to get more lawsuits and keep lawsuits moving forward. So if you're not a lifetime member of the SAF, please, please, please consider becoming a member at saf.org. Let me go ahead and get a couple more comments in. We're already over the 30 minutes, but let me get a couple more comments in. We'll go ahead and shut this down. And Michael over on the Facebook side says, guns in the hands of honest citizens save lives and property, and yes, gun control laws adversely affect only law-abiding citizens. With guns, we are citizens. Without them, we are subjects. And Dan, when Rob Morse and I talked the other day, we had a discussion, and basically it came down to, when gun control comes up, we need to start asking the gun control proponents just how many people are acceptable for you to kill with your legislation, because we can point with statistics. When you pass gun control legislation, people die because of it. How many more do you want to kill with your legislation?
Yeah. They always say, how many children have to die before you'll give up your AR-15. My question to them is, how many children have to die before you'll do something to stop gun-free school zones? Because that's where the kids are getting killed. It's because people aren't able to defend themselves and the children. So these anti-gunners get the kids killed, then they stand on the graves of those children and they push for more gun regulations. They're a sick bunch. They're sick. They're twisted and sick.
Absolutely. One last comment, we got to shut it down. Michael says, when you say New York, you need to be specific, because New York City has their own laws. And beyond that, and Dan, you're aware of this, you can have a New York State carry permit. You still cannot carry in New York City.
Right. Yep, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, I should have made the distinction. There is a very, very distinct difference between New York City and the rest of the state. However, New York State is a May issue state. So, and we have where I am, we have what's a two-tier permit, where you have to take your first basic training and you get your first restricted carry license, and then you got to go for more training and pay more fees to get your unrestricted. So it's still pretty tough in the rest of the state, but it's even worse in New York City. You're right.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and set this one aside. If you're watching live, come join us again tomorrow. And if you're catching us on podcast, either way, please share the show with a friend. We are growing amazingly. Please help us grow and share the show with a friend. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Especially thank you for commenting and being a part of the show. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again, everybody.